I want to apologize to the mentors because we had both so many teams and so little time to sort it all out. Some of the mentors are going to be split in half, meaning you have two teams, but you can't be at both places at once. So we're going to record the breakout sessions. And also for Steve and for Art, I was able to put you both with both your teams in the same room, but that also means there's not very many other mentors. And so it's okay if you guys want to comment on your own teams. Traditionally, the mentor normally doesn't comment on their team, but if you notice that there's sort of a quiet spot space and there's crickets chirping, then go ahead and pitch in, because sometimes we'll have you have two teams. Francis, are you pretty much ready to go? I'll turn it over to you.
Sure.
Just to go through these slides and bring Will up to bat.
Okay, so here we go then. Thank you. Okay, so you already discussed this. Okay, so I guess.
I didn't discuss the homework.
Oh,
so
okay.
Do
you want us to, okay, the homework. Okay. For next Tuesday, you need to conduct at least 2 or more customer discovery interviews. The presentations that Isabelle and Dr. Grover are gonna give you are going to be very helpful to you in this customer discovery process. But next week, you need to prepare a slide deck that has 4 slides. And these are the slides that you need to include. The first one is your introduction or business thesis. The second is the problem that you're going to address. For the first time, you're going to do an interview summary. And then on the fourth slide is the 2-panel business model canvas. In Basecamp, you're going to find a template that has the guidelines of how to complete these slides, in addition to examples of previous teams and how they presented this content. Okay, so if you want to take a picture of this, this is how the 3 breakout rooms are being assigned. In breakout room, these are the teams that are in the first column. Breakout room, the second column, and the third breakout room in the third column. Jay Gilbert is going to facilitate room number 1. I believe Steve Sharp is going to facilitate room number 2. And breakout number 3 is going to be Art Soldier.
Okay, well, sorry for the delay, but we wanted to get everything straight this first time. And next week it'll be I'll try to mix up the breakout rooms so everyone gets a chance to hear everyone else. So tonight you'll speak for 3 minutes and then have comments for 7 minutes for a total of 10 minutes. And if you sit long, one of us moderators should slow you down. And if we don't slow you down, it's still 10 minutes, so you'll have less feedback. And I guess everyone should be reminded to mute themselves, except for Will, or actually, Francis, if you want to introduce Will. If not, Will, you're good to begin.
Sure, I'll just jump right on in here. Let me. So I'm going to share. I just got 2 slides here real quick. I'll try to share from my side here. So that, and then this. So Jay, hopefully that's visible.
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent. Okie dokie. That's good enough. All right.
Yeah.
So Super. Thank you for the confirmation. Okay, and thanks again for the invitation to come. So it's in preparing for this, I logged into Basecamp and saw how many of these teams I've been part of over the years, which was a little horrifying but a little exciting too. So this is why I get the opportunity to say hi to you all and share just a couple slides worth of some thoughts about this process from my perspective, having gone through it a number of times, and especially the value of customer discovery, which will be the theme of tonight as well. So just 2 slides worth of thoughts, hopefully some useful information for everybody in here. I'm an associate professor of bioengineering here at UCR. And like I said, I've been through the INNOVAR program so many times that when I first started, it wasn't even called INNOVAR, I don't think, back in those days. And it's been neat, about every technology, well, every grad student in my lab has gone through it with me since I think the program existed. It's been a wonderful opportunity for them to really do a deep dive into what they're trying to accomplish with their research. And so this is my little Basecamp dashboard here, and you can see things where we've tried to commercialize things ranging from sensors to software for designing medical diagnostics to instruments for synthesizing DNA faster and cheaper, to the project that I'm currently part of with my co-PI Sam Ying on the Otter Sampler, a water sampling device for underserved communities in the Eastern Coachella Valley. We'll talk more about that later. But the one that was the most successful experience was technology that spun off from my lab that gave rise to a company that we created called Match Sample Corporation that I co-founded and serve on the advisory board for. So that's ongoing. So that's my my background with this experience at the INNOVAR program and what it's made possible for me. 2 slides worth of just general thoughts to kick off the content tonight about customer discovery. The first set of slides is some observations for the scientists and the engineers and the innovators and inventors in the room. I try to categorize myself in that heap, and these are the things that stuck out to me as interesting and valuable about the INNOVAR process that I wanted to share with you guys. First thing is that there's an expression that I'm sure you've heard of. I'm fond of it. That when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I've been guilty of that many times in my career. And in a lot of ways, I'm not sure it's a bad thing. Sometimes it's said as a pejorative, and I'm not sure it's necessarily bad. But the theme of the INNOVAR program for us as engineers, our job is to create hammers. And we love our hammers. The stuff I develop in my lab and I try to commercialize is technology that I love deeply and believe in, and I want to see it succeed. And it's easy for us to kind of go overboard and fall too in love with our hammers sometimes. And so one theme of INNOVAR, and one thing that's good about this program for us scientists and engineers and inventors, is that this program forces us to put down our dang hammers and actually focus on the nails for a period of time. That can be so valuable, right? Here in the metaphor and the little illustration showing there that even though I have my hammer and I love it and I think it can do so much, if I focus closely on the nail, I'll realize it's actually a screw, and I should have probably come up with a better technology to go after it, right? And the opportunity to do that is a blessing. It really reaps rewards. I'll give you some concrete examples. If in doing customer discovery, you speak to your potential customers and you find that the hammer that you developed, your proposed solution, it solves your customers' problems, that's great. Go to town. You now have evidence that when you further develop and commercialize this, it will have an audience of customers waiting at the gates to purchase it, and that's a good data point. You might also find that your proposed solution doesn't solve the problems that you find your customer has. And I'd argue and say that's actually great too, right? You now have an insight into what really matters, what customers really need, because you've spoken to them and you've heard direct from their mouth to your ear what their actual needs are. And you have the opportunity now to pivot. And so you're in a position that no one else is in to be like, aha, now I see where the puck is heading. I know where I need to skate, to mix my hockey metaphors here. So either way, it's a winning situation. You're going to learn something of value either way. I'd also say, and maybe this is obvious to you all, it only occurred to me a few times into this program that, the INNOVAR program and the various things that it's based on is the scientific method only applied to entrepreneurship, right? All of us in science and engineering, we're taught that virtuous cycle of form a hypothesis, perform experiments, analyze the data, revise the hypothesis, etc. And, that suits us as scientists, and that's all we're doing here. So this is, I think for us as scientists, this is a very natural and comfortable way to pursue something like entrepreneurship and tech transfer and commercialization of our research. You're just doing the same thing you do in your day job, only this time the experiments that you're doing are customer discovery, right? The data that you are analyzing is feedback from folks that you talk to when you're doing these interviews, like we're going to have to do a couple of coming in the coming week. Revising our hypothesis is refining what we think our hammer is capable of doing, maybe even trying to come up with a new hammer sometimes if we need to. That's all we're doing. Here's another bit of advice for the scientists and engineers in the room. Don't develop a malaria test that only works in air conditioning. What I mean for that is I teach a class every year on medical diagnostics. And as part of that class, we study rapid diagnostic tests for diseases like malaria. I show you one there on the slide. And if you look into this history, it's quite interesting. Many, many companies in North America, Western Europe, Japan, what have you, develop rapid diagnostic tests for malaria. And then they find that they work quite nicely in the lab. And then when they deploy them to the parts of the world where malaria is actually a problem, which is generally around the tropics, the equatorial regions of the world, they find that the tests don't work that well. And so why is that the case? Well, hindsight's 50-50, but you know, the WHO, the World Health Organization, actually does this testing, and this happens time and time and time again. And what's happening here, perhaps obviously, is that if you develop a test that works in an air-conditioned lab in North America, but then you ship it to parts of the world that have malaria, it needs to work there as well. Well, what's life like in parts of the world that have malaria? Often high humidity, high temperatures. These are all conditions that can make a rapid diagnostic test like that fail, maybe not surprisingly. So this is a long-winded way of saying, for us as engineers, it's easy for me in my lab to think, I think I know a problem I'd like to solve, and I think I know what I need to do to solve it and make something that's useful to someone else. And that's all well and good, and that's how engineering works often. But the reality is, I know very little myself about what someone on the ground in parts of the world where malaria is a problem, what the conditions that they're working in, the challenges they face, right? And so if I really want to develop a malaria test to work in all parts of the world, I need to learn about my customers more, okay? Otherwise, I'm pretty much doomed to create something that only works in air conditioning. So that's that story. And then finally, this is for the professors and the grad students in the room. This experience that you're doing in INNOVAR can be really valuable in future grant proposals as well. Here's what I mean by that. National Science Foundation and other funding agencies, increasingly in the sciences and definitely in the engineering side of things, they want to see that the research that you're proposing to do has some sort of benefit, some value to some sector of the world, the economy, some individuals, what have you. And not everything has to be applied, but you know, if you can show that what you're trying to create is useful to someone, generally that's a gold star on your proposal. So think about it. How are you going to argue in a proposal that what you're proposing to do is actually useful to some real person? You can say that you think it would be useful. That's good enough. Or if you've been through the INNOVAR program and learned about customer discovery and some of the principles that you'll learn in this, you can say, not only do I think this is going to be useful, I actually interviewed 40 people and 37 of them said, yes, this is useful to me. This is what I want, right? Think about how much stronger an application it is to have real data from real customer discovery proving to the reviewers that what you're proposing to do really is useful and there's really a demand for it. Okay, so that's the slide for the scientists and inventors in the room. The second and last slide is just thoughts about customer discovery. Having gone through this process a few times, at the most great depth and most fun with Steve Sharp, who helped me with customer discovery for that company that's been formed since then that does chemical analysis technologies. Customer discovery, yeah, I really believe in the value of this. This is even trickled down into some of my classes that I teach. Even our senior design curriculum in bioengineering, we cover this topic, right? Because again, it's easy for a bioengineer to think I'm going to engineer something that helps public health. When in reality, we have no idea what the actual needs of our intended user really are. The only way we can learn that is by talking to that person. It's obvious in hindsight, but without reminding folks of that, sometimes they don't just naturally do it. I didn't naturally do it before I learned this curriculum. So a few take-home messages about customer discovery, how important it is. You want to start the conversation with your potential customer nice and broad, very broad. What's your biggest pain, right? What keeps you awake at night? In your job of whatever, or in your role in whatever relevant context for whatever it is you're trying to develop. This is hard for us sometimes. Again, think back to the hammer. I developed a hammer. I'm going into this conversation with you with a secret agenda. I secretly want to commercialize my hammer, and I hope it's really awesome and makes me money. But I can't start with the hammer, right? If I bring up the technology or whatever my proposed solution is right out of the gate, then I am missing an opportunity. I am coloring the perceptions of the person that I'm speaking to. when you're first having that conversation with someone, I want to learn as much as I can from them first about what their real problems are before I steer the conversation toward the hammer that I developed and I want to sell them or something, right? Because there's so much to learn from that. So here's the other. There's two reasons it's good to start broad. One is what I just said, that I need to learn unfiltered takes from people. The other thing that's good about starting broad and saying what's your biggest pain is actually physically shown here on these grainy MRI images. This was a study where these researchers looked at the brains of folks when they're asked to talk about themselves and say what their opinion is about something. And what these researchers found is the parts of your brain that light up when you're talking about yourself and sharing your opinions about something are actually some of the same parts of the brain that light up during sex and light up when you're eating a delicious meal. Isn't that interesting? And so this is to say that if you want to set off on a good foot with someone in an interview, get them talking about themselves, right? Ask for their opinion about something. It warms them up to you and will hopefully open the floodgates so that when we will get more information out of them, it'll be useful for you. Another thing, if you ever watch Law and Order or served on jury duty, you've heard about the admonition, don't lead the witness, right? In a legal context, right, this is where a lawyer is secretly wanting the witness to say something, and so they kind of ask a squirrely question in a certain direction. Don't do that in these interviews. You're only hurting yourself, right? Ask broad questions initially and learn and listen as much as you can, because I want that unfiltered take of what the real problems are that you, my customer, are facing, not my preconceived notions of what I think those problems are, which is probably not accurate, okay? So don't fight the urge to steer people in a particular direction. At least early on, fight that urge. Later on, you can kind of steer it in specific directions. The value of doing this is obvious. You can discover pain points in those customers that you never would have known existed otherwise. Several research projects in my own research lab at UCR came about not because I thought them up as the PI, but because these were pain points and problems that people Steve and I interviewed and brought up on their own, and I knew nothing about them, but I was like, geez, that's fascinating. Maybe this pain point isn't what I'm going after for this round in INNOVAR, but dang it, if I couldn't work on that in my lab. And then a couple of years later, lo and behold, I'm back at INNOVAR trying to commercialize a solution aiming at those pain points, right? You see how it works? So you can just learn so much from this unfiltered take of getting people's opinions. Of course, the flip side of that is sometimes people tend to go off on a tangent, and they might start talking about, oh, my biggest pain point is, Joe in accounting has his radio on too loud. Okay, I can't, I probably can't fix that, so that's okay. And so when that happens, we delicately steer the conversation in the direction that you really care about. But at least give the person an opportunity to say, big picture, one or two things that are on their mind and are their actual pain points. You'll learn a lot from it. Couple more thoughts reflecting back on me and Steve doing quite a bit of this via Zoom during the pandemic. It's amazing how friendly most people are. I'm an introverted person by nature. I'd rather not seek out and talk to strangers, but it becomes easier and easier the more that you do it. And it's made even easier by the fact that, well, you saw the MRI slide, people like to talk about themselves. They like to talk about their opinions about things. So it's often not hard to get people to open up to you. And it's kind of enjoyable for hopefully for our parties involved. I was also amazed by how open people can be, how frank they can be, even people that are potential competition. So when we were commercializing this chemical analysis technology, we were speaking to people that were working in companies that make chemical analysis technologies. And so, some of them reacted and held their cards a little close to their chest, and I respect that. But many people were quite open and were even critical about their technologies in fair ways, or commenting about strengths of competitors. A level of frankness that it always amazed me. And those were very useful data points in interviews, because we learned quite a lot from folks. It was surprising how open they could be if you just are willing to ask. If a customer brings up something unexpected but valuable, feel free to go off the script. This is another thing I think Steve taught me. The script of interview questions is there, and it's useful to have handy and return to it when you are ready to. But sometimes someone says something, you're like, whoa, that's very interesting. Could we dig a little bit deeper into that? So be ready to go off the cuff and off the script and dig a little deeper if something's really useful. Later in the interview, I think it's okay then to bring up your specific solution. Then it's time to say, okay, here's the hammer I developed. I think it's useful for X, Y, and Z. And what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that this could have utility or be useful from your perspective in your role? That's the time to bring it up. Not at the beginning is the key thing here. You know, really good interviewees could in the future become other roles in your company, like a future advisor, even a board member. Not every interview goes this well, but I remember Steve and I had 5 or 6 people that we really just clicked with, right? And have even kept in touch with some of these folks and kept them on short lists for advisory board members if the time comes to add more members to the board. Good people. So this is a great way to grow your Rolodex, as they say. And finally, this is another wonderful lesson that Steve taught me is to finish the interviews by asking, is there anyone else we should be talking to about this? This is a brilliant, brilliant question. This opens up the whole network of contacts exponentially. So for the chemical analysis technology, you know, we thought we knew who the customers were, but by asking them this exact question at the end of the interview, they were telling us about things like, oh, trade organizations, right? You know, groups of industries, trade groups and the like that were aligned with our interests and would be wonderful resources to talk to. And we, at least I, wasn't even aware these existed before asking those sorts of questions. So take advantage of that as well. After the conversation's over, who else should we be talking to learn about these things? And you'll be, again, surprised by how forthcoming folks are with sharing their own contacts, in some cases even introducing you to people, right? These are people you would have never found otherwise, and you got to leverage the social network to find them and speak to them in additional interviews. And that's the 2 slides I've got for you today. So hopefully there was some useful information for all of that. And so, you know, best of luck to everyone as you go through the INNOVAR process. It's been extremely valuable to me. I hope you get as much out of it as I have all these times. So thanks again, Jay, for the opportunity to come and speak.
Well, you're more than welcome. That was awesome. Will, I'm going to open it up to the class for the next minute or so. If anyone would like to ask a question, you going to take all comers, Will?
Oh yeah, whatever you have. You're in charge, Jay.
I have a question. This is Magdalena Zepeda-Salih from Got Info app. My question is, I was reading some of the readings from the base camp, and there were some questions that you can ask people in customer discovery about their future, like futuristic questions, like if you could improve one aspect of the way, for us, the way you connect with customers. That is not necessarily the best question as opposed to what have you done in the past. So how exactly should we phrase those 2 questions? And should we even ask the second question about futuristic plans or what they think about doing, or if they could, or in an ideal world? What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think, you know, Steve and I asked all combinations of those. You know, sometimes I think the way we phrased it was if you had a magic wand and you could wave it and fix one thing about your day-to-day circumstances and your job and your whatever the context is that we're talking to you about, what would that be? And I don't know, in a way, that's like isn't it the mirror image of the question, what's the biggest pain point that you face? But one is sort of negative, you know, complain about a pain point for me. Okay, people are generally okay doing that. But when you flip it to the magic wand, it's a positive, right? It's saying if you could change something, what would it be? And so I kind of like both approaches. It might be a combination of what feels more natural to you, and then just the nature of you know, the conversation you're having, which you think would be more resonant with the interviewee. But I'm sure the other, you know, the EIRs probably have more concrete examples, advice on this, but that would be my take.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Zeph from Superfoam. I have a question. So one of the things I've noticed sometimes is that if you're being polite and nice, the person you're interviewing are also polite and nice. And I only found out much later that they were just being polite and not pointing out some of the problems that they may experience, maybe even with the solution that we'd envisioned. So are there any tips you have on picking up on clues? Because, you know, you do the whole interview and then you come back and you go back the second time, you find out from somewhere else and you go back and check. And that's the only time to discover, oh yeah, even I had this problem. So I don't know if you have any tips on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I must admit, I don't have evidence that that I've seen that exact the phenomena you're talking about in my own interviewing experience. You know, people replied what they said, and I'm not sure that if whether they were identifying, you know, negative things or whatever was a consequence of how I interacted with them or what. So I'd almost have to defer to the experts on that specific topic. Jay,
Well,
you have any
yeah,
thoughts?
I
Or
mean, Zeph brings up a brilliant point, actually, which is that when people have no interest in your subject, they don't tell you you're an idiot and this idea is terrible. They're going to say something like, that sounds interesting, or I wish you well, I wish you luck, and nice meeting you. And so some people will interpret that as meaning he loves my idea and he loves me, or she loves me and loves my idea. So you do have to follow up with something more specific if this is someone who's a potential customer. But typically, what Will has said is you don't lead with, is my baby beautiful or ugly, or what do you think of my hammer? That's sort of at the very end of the discussion. And so there should be some clues, uh, before you get to that point. And if you don't sense that they're very interested in what you're doing anyhow, I mean, why even bother? I mean, you don't need to describe your hammer. You might want to say, wave your magic wand, because those are like two very similar sorts of questions. But when you say wave your magic wand, they're not going to say hammer. They're going to say screwdriver or something else, which may or may not be in your wheelhouse. I think Isabel wanted to make a comment also, or maybe not. Just look in the chat to see
But I
if
was
she's.
just saying that challenge happens and is even more concerning if you end up talking to 5 or 10 people and 3 of them are not that great. But on a high volume, and we're not in national here, but the more interviews, the more people you talk to, I'm thinking even if a few may not be authentic or well picked, unfortunately, I would think overall, right, you're looking for theme in the data. So the more data you have, right, it's just scientific process, right? If those are aberrations, I would think they would be, negligible in the bigger scheme of things, and I wouldn't worry about it.
yeah.
Thank you. Scott has his hand raised, and then if any students have any questions, we've got a couple more minutes for Will.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I deal this like literally every day on the fundraising side of things. I would say that for the entrepreneurs, it definitely depends a lot on what level of person you're talking to within the, or like, for example, if you're talking to an SVP at a large corporation, they're probably going to be more polite and maybe a little bit less down and dirty in terms of like giving you advice and things like that, because they don't want to make a mistake and not talk about your startup to their company if it had been a fit. And that happens with investors a lot too. So you'll have investors will basically almost never say anything negative and almost never give you a no. And then for especially first-time founders, they always tell me, oh, the meeting went great, they're definitely going to invest. And so the same thing could be said of these questions. So I would just say that just kind of make sure you always have a little bit of skepticism, especially if you're talking to a high-level person at a large company.
So, Will, I have a question for you. I take it back though. Tom goes first. Oh, Dom?
There we go. Okay. Oh, so I have a question. My particular specialty is design thinking, and during the kind of questioning of design thinking, sometimes you naturally want to bring them to that thought process of what you're probably moving towards. But my question is, how do you separate yourself or separate that thought process when you're like, I know that I possibly have a solution, but I want to make it as open as possible so I can get the most amount of feedback.
Yeah, it's that's the art to it, right? Because if you're like me, it's so, they say something that is a lead into you just starting to describe your proposed solution, whatever, and it's so tempting to want to launch into that, right? And so yeah, it takes some practice to avoid that until the point where you feel like you've learned as much unfiltered as possible about their needs. I think having a little script can help that, right? So going into our interviews, we would have 10 or so questions lined up, and you could see they started at this very general level, and then it was only the actual technology details were only described at the 8th or 9th kind of question. And so the structure like that maybe would help you to stay on the on the goal of learning as much unfiltered before you transition into talking about your proposed technology.
Thank you. Xinping, you're next.
Yeah, so our team is working on the mental health AI. So how can we ensure in the interviews the type of question we ask might trigger the institutional review, board review?
Oh, human subjects kind of
Yeah.
you sort of that's a great question. I'm not so there again. I'm gonna phone a friend. Have human subjects testing, those sorts of ethical concerns ever been an issue during customer discovery? I'm not sure. Yeah, because this isn't a research project that we're doing here, right? These could be this could the conversations you're having with your subject, so to speak, could actually just be someone that you talk to on the train, right, or something. They're not a subject in a research project, and so the protections are not, I don't think, the same protections that you would get, in terms of like requiring an IRB or something, right? So if you're asking questions that are of the sort that would require an IRB, you might be doing it wrong. It seems that's those are probably not the kind of questions you'd be wanting to ask here.
But I've got a follow-up question to that, which is how much or how often do you take the technology out when you're doing these customer discovery interviews?
For me, and actually showing, or when you say take it out, you mean show it, or
Talking about customer needs and pains and wants as opposed to the technology of what you've developed, how much do you take out this discussion about the technology so that certainly they would never feel like they're a subject. But is it even, I mean, you've got other things in terms of disclosures that you don't want to be making if you're too focused on the specifics of the technology. So typically, it's a leading question, do you want to be disclosing proprietary stuff in these customer discovery interviews?
Yeah. Is that helpful? I think that's partly an answer to the original question. That I'd have to know more maybe about the specific problem you're trying to solve. But you would not, it would not be questions that resemble diagnosing an illness, for example, in the person, right? That's not what this is about. But if you were asking them, say they've used apps to pursue or try to help with their mental health or well-being, and asking them, what's been your experience with that? What kind of positive or negative experiences have you had along those lines? Then that seems like fair game, but maybe it all depends on the specifics of what you're trying to do.
Adam is first and Eric is last, then we're going to move on.
Yeah, we came into a similar problem when I was doing my previous TCOR, ICOR interviews. And we're basically advised to avoid anything which looks like personal question or something which looks like we providing medical advice.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, you may actually start from that, saying that we having discussion. I'm not providing medical advice. I'm not asking you about your symptoms. We just have a general discussion. So we were actually warned because we had some ideas about genetic tests, and we were basically told not to ask people, let's say, to volunteer results of the latest genetic test and advise them on it. Right?
Yes.
This would be enormous violation of privacy. And some of the discussions steered that way. So we were basically schooled not to ask certain questions, or in some point, if it went to this direction, said, no, this is not who we are. We cannot provide this information.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, in general, I think that in a good interview, most of the information is flowing from the interviewee to you, right? And there's no diagnosis or no other information flowing in the opposite direction. There might be some, but it's minimal. So hopefully, you're not providing a service or a guarantee of anything to this person. You're mostly just trying to learn from them. Yeah.
If they start to provide information which sounds like medical, you have to stop them.
That's a great.
No, I'm not interested. This is not who we are. We not collect information like this.
Could you look at this spot on my neck over here? Yeah, don't play doctor through Zoom. That's good. That's good advice in general. Yeah, Eric?
Yeah, no, I think that most of this has been covered. And just what Adam was saying was part of what I wanted to get on as well. That, but you can phrase what you're looking for without specifically saying, is my baby ugly or attractive? In the sense that you could say, we know that you're an expert in, the tools that are currently used for mental health checks, and we're looking in that space. We want to hear what issues you have in that space. So that keeps them focused there. But again, you don't want them to say, oh, this patient has these symptoms, this patient has those symptoms. Exactly as Adam said, you tell them, we don't want to hear that. We just want to know, how are the tools that you're using working? Because this is the space that we're studying right now.
Yeah, well said. Makes sense.
Thank you. They're very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. This was awesome, Will. Really fantastic. I'm glad we filmed it, and so future people can enjoy this, and you don't have to remember everything you just did. So this is really awesome, and this is the perfect segue to Isabelle speaking about customer discovery, where she's going to get into a little more details of the nuts and bolts of how we're going about doing this. But this set the stage. It's just really, we're very fortunate to have Professor Grover here. So thank you again. Let's raise our give a reaction in the Zoom room like that or something.
Yeah, this is a hard act to follow. Congratulations, because I've obviously under I know you did a lot with Steve, who's a great mentor, but the fact that you can actually now talk about this as an expert, even after just going through it a few times, I'm impressed, Will. So I'm gonna try to not repeat a lot of things you said, because you said a lot of key things. I was actually up early at 6 this morning going through a national ICOR cohort, and that was the topic for the day. So I'm gonna try to think of some nuggets I heard from the national instructors today on interviewing. And again, I'm gonna try not to repeat what we just heard, which was amazing information and great insights about interviewing. So this is one of my favorite topics, because what I love about customer discovery, it's really about having conversations with people, which I'm always keen on, because I like to talk and I like to get to know people. So maybe, for me, it comes more naturally than some other folks. And I do empathize with a lot of you who may be spending days in labs and maybe more introverted by nature, which is completely fine. So, having to get out there and interview people, I understand that that could be feeling like a big effort. And there is a little bit of that, improv component of it that I think can be learned over time. And obviously, we'll, learn it really well. But I think this is sometimes where it gets hard, right? It's being able to bounce on the spot of what the person is telling you, because that's where some of the nuggets are, when you hear something you're not expecting necessarily, and it's like, how do you go deeper on that? So anyway, but again, we covered a lot of these points, so I'm going to try to focus on maybe what we haven't talked about as much. So really, this interview is a conversation. It's about learning about their behavior, pain, needs, wants, and starting to get a sense about what it would take for them as a customer to be willing to change whatever they are doing today. That's really the key. Is most of us, we have our habits. We are, some of it we don't like what we do, or we might, but otherwise, right? How many people will keep saying every year they want to lose weight, and they keep trying every new year to do that, right? So it's not just about sometimes willing to change the behavior or doing, there's more, and that isn't involved in that. So the more you get to understand the customers, the better. I will also repeat that, for this program, we ask a minimum number of interviews. When you go to a national level, it's 100. The more people you can talk to, the better, right? It's just, scientific again. The more data points you have, the more insights you can get. So this is the hard part, I think. Really get on it as soon as you can and start talking to people, because the more insights we have, the more we can help you as mentors to look at what you've heard and make sense of that. So we also want you to be, you know, ambitious but realistic about how many hypotheses you can test in one interview. Again, not about selling, pitching. We've heard that loud and clear. And, you know, be clear about some of the hypotheses going into the interview that you want to test. And, you know, practically, again, thinking about, you know, hey, let's secure the interview, let's conduct the interview, get feedback, and what do we do after? Those are kind of the key steps. I will, let me see. Yes, so one of the big questions is going to be, you know, who do I interview? You know, what are the kind of people? And I think Scott made a comment that reminded me of something. Mid managers type of levels might be really good people to target, because, you know, I remember teams were like, oh, we're going to talk to the CEOs of all the automotive companies. I'm like, yeah, good luck trying to get an interview, you know, with the head of you know, BMW America or whatever, you know, maybe possible, but it's probably going to be hard to get in the next couple of weeks. So think about who, you know, the kind of people you want to talk to. Maybe, you know, they have minimum of authority, but try to think, okay, who are the people who could really know the topic, could help me get insights of what they are trying to do, and maybe a little bit more, you know, reachable. So start, you know, brainstorming with your team. Okay, who do we want to talk to? What kind of jobs are they in? What kind of company are they in? And then, you know, we have some templates you can use to reach out. Leverage the UCR, you know, UCR as much as you can, right? So again, the more you can talk about doing research, asking for advice, I think Will alluded to that. Most people are helpful in nature. Most people want to help you. You know, you just have to be, you know, courteous as you're asking. And if you're mentioning, you know, that you want their advice or doing research, I think they will, many of them will answer favorably to that. In terms of asking for a meeting, you want to make that easy on them. So we usually recommend to ask for 15 or 20-minute appointments. The reason is because most people book, you know, we book our appointments usually in 30-minute increment, right? 30-minute an hour meetings or longer. So, you know, 15, 20 minutes sounds like, you know, not a very long time. But what's smart about it is that if the conversation starts going really well, it's usually easy to ask, oh, you know, I'm, you know, really enjoying that. I'm getting a lot of insights from you. Could we go 10 or 15 minutes longer? Which they probably will say yes to, because they likely don't have a meeting scheduled until right the half or the top of the hour. But if you're asking for 15, 20 minutes, a lot of people think, hey, it's okay, I can handle that. It's not a long time. So they want to say yes, just like if you come in with, you know, an approach about doing research, being a student, you know, UCR and all that stuff. We usually ask that if you can, the best is really in-person interviews. Now, when it's difficult, video calls are also okay. So, you know, Zoom. If really there is no other choice, a phone call might be also okay. No emails, no survey monkey, nothing like that, right? The point is to have a conversation. It's great when you can have a video call, because at least you can also read their expression, a minimum body gesture, which is harder to do just on phone calls. So either way, you know, is fine. But we do not want you to try to interview them via email, for example, or even, you know, any kind of like messaging, online messaging and that kind of thing. This is a sample email that you can have access to. And we have all these resources, I believe, in Basecamp folder. When you start the interview, again, Will presented it actually really well, so hard to follow, but show empathy, you know, just be, you know, yourself. You know, you may be a PhD or, you know, it's okay, just be, you know, I know you're a nice person no matter what, so just show empathy, show that making them at ease is key. Remind them of what you're doing through UCR, INNOVAR, and you know, I think start with very open-ended questions, right? So we also recommend to not be scripted. If that helps you, jot down a few questions that, you know, you're thinking, oh, that would be great to ask some of these questions, but don't come in with your checklist of, I need to ask, you know, all these questions. And think more in themes, right? So what are some of the things you're trying to cover, right? So making sure maybe you get to the problem you're thinking you're addressing. And then what I also want to emphasize is don't go down too deep into the problem at first, because one of the things that sometimes lead to, to data that's not great is you want to make sure that the problem you're solving is actually a priority for them, or in among the most important things they are dealing with, right? Because if it's, number 10 on their list and they have, a fire on the first 3 or 4 things, number 10, even if they think at some point they want to solve it, might not be a big issue. And, once they start saying, yes, this is a major problem I'm trying to deal with, how do you do it today? Have you tried other solutions that, to solve it? If they didn't work out, why? So again, having that conversations around that. I also want to say something important. I know many of you have been maybe in the academic world a long time, or some of you may be still graduating students and, getting into the workforce soon. For some of us who've been in corporate jobs in, a long time, when you talk to people in companies, right? So if you have a product that targets more of a B2B model, and you're going to go after, the head of R&D at a pharmaceutical company, for example. A lot of times, what's, driving people, right, in a salaried employee function is, I don't want to get fired. Maybe I want to get promoted. I want to raise, hell, I hope I'm not losing my job because I'm the sole provider for my family, and that would be really bad, right? And I say that because sometimes, right, you're thinking, well, how could they not want to have this innovative product or technology I'm launching? But again, they probably do, or they are probably interested in it. But you have to understand there are a lot of these other things that are at play, right? So I say that because I think sometimes that's something that may be hard to understand when you're, working on amazing, genius technology all day in a lab. But again, putting yourself in the shoes of your customers, what's going through their mind as they're evaluating technology, because if they are in a company, right, there are a lot of different forces at play. So that's kind of your job to also understand what does that look like, or how do they feel about that? And if you have more questions about that, that's why the mentors are here for, right? We're here to help you identify some of these dynamics and things like that. So again, as we mentioned, think of interviews, kind of the topics you want to cover in that short amount of time. And don't be too scared if there are some questions you don't get to, because the best thing that can happen is actually that they start going on a path you didn't expect, because that could really reveal a lot of things you need to know that could lead you to pivot later. And embracing bad news is one of the biggest things you're going to learn here that would be helpful for your life in general. Sometimes bad news is really good, helps you save a lot of time and money. So if you're hearing something you don't really want to hear and you're starting to freak out, do not get scared. That's why we're doing this early on, because we want to help you build the right foundation for your company. So the earlier you figure these things out, the better it will be in the long term. It's completely okay to go off topic, and if you have the person that you interview is really starting to ask of some other things, or even at the end, may ask more information about the technology, the product. If it's not proprietary and you want to share a little bit more, that's completely fine. Very important to ask at the end, make sure you have a few minutes to ask those key questions. One is about, is there anything I should have asked that I didn't ask you? Because some of the things may be percolating in their brains. Or what is the most important thing you wanted to convey, right? If you wanted to kind of have them identify some of the most important things that happen in the conversation. And then the other big thing is, I think I have it on another slide, is who else should I talk to? So again, we made a big point of that. This one, yes, we talked also a lot about that, about, you know, the confirmation bias. Is your baby ugly? Again, people are nice. So sometimes if you're, you know, not asking open-ended questions or you're trying to get confirmation, you will get the confirmation, unfortunately. And so, you know, if you're asking, you know, do you want to do this cheaper, faster, right? I mean, which, you know, healthy human being is not going to say yes. So that's the other thing about hypothesis is, you know, do not go ask something that every, you know, healthy human being will say yes to, right? One hypothesis we use as an example is mothers don't want their children to get bug bites. It's not a good hypothesis because, right, no normal mother wants a child to get a bug bite. So it doesn't help you to test that hypothesis at all. You know, don't try to spend time on things you don't know. That's the point. It's like, you know, see that almost as a game. You know, what is it that I can learn that I don't know yet about my customer? And of course, at the end, be thankful of their time. Ask for referrals. Who else would you recommend I talk to? Because that's the best way for you to get more interviews. And ask for permission to follow up. You know, so that's a great way to start your CRM, you know, customer relationship management, your list of people to connect with later. The reason why I think this exercise is extremely helpful, not just about learning about bad news, but more importantly, this is actually a very early start of the selling process. So because, right, nobody wants to be hard sold to, like, right? So, but this is actually one of the best selling technique for the future is actually when you're really having a conversation with someone, building a rapport, and then eventually they are interested, they want to keep talking to you about what you're doing. So even though you may not feel like it, you're already starting to do some sales here. And again, discuss and analyze. So we recommend at least 2 people from the team to attend the interview because we can all hear different things as, you know, human beings. Even if you're using a recording device, like one of those wonderful AI tools, which I'm gonna go, you know, crazy because I always eject them from my meeting, especially when the people are not in the meeting and they use the AI tool, which is to me a no-no. So you can read that or, you know, use the recordings if you want to process the information, go back to it. But it's really important to talk to your teams about, hey, how are we hearing the same things? You know, this is kind of my big takeaway. Do you agree with me? So that's important to check that with your team, synthesize the information, decide, did that validate or invalidate my hypothesis? How do we feel about it? Because sometimes the information may be falling in the gray, right? So like, how do we feel about it? It might not always be so black and white. And again, you know, as a kind of recap, listening is key. So try to do as much listening as you can, not speaking. Be prepared with topics and questions, but don't be over-scripted. And don't be defensive or argumentative, right? So I know this can be also tempting when, you know, someone is trying to bash your technology or something, or say, oh, this is useless, or, you know, yes, don't take it personally. That's the key thing. Be respectful. And then this is, again, something you learn. So we don't expect you to be a perfect interviewer on day one. We can coach you. We can give you some examples, you know, role play, whatever it takes. But I think to me, that's where using the mentor can be key, is really just even working on how you do these interviews, because these are key, right? It's like if you don't do the interviews, you know, well enough, you're not going to really get the points and the data you're trying to get for this course. So if you have any concerns, any questions, reach out to us, because we want you to feel comfortable doing that. This is really a foundation of this class. So yeah, and then again, if they want to learn more, I think we all talked about that too. You know, you can keep them involved in the development of the technology and what you're doing. Yeah, my slides have too much copy on it, by the way, so next time I'm gonna cut it. That's too much. Don't read my slides. Yes, so discuss, and so I'll open it for questions, even though I know we had already a lot of good questions.
Thank you, Isabel. That was really wonderful. You covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time. And I know people might be overwhelmed, but we still have a couple of minutes if anyone has any follow-up questions for Isabel. And I see Magdalena has her hand raised, so you go first.
Thank you again. Hi, thank you, Isabella. This is great. Thank you for the clarity. One of the questions I had was the validity of the data, because these conversations can go one way or the other, depending on what's coming. Do we just accept it all as data, even and there's no real validity to it, or there is or there isn't? Because I guess in quantitative data, it's like the same questions have to be asked of the same at the same way in the same format in order for the data to be valid. But what about this case?
I like that you're thinking really as a scientist, right? Yes, so yeah, and I will say, in general, that's why, you analyze the data with your team. I will say, I will look for themes. I will look for, even if it's not exactly the same question you ask, if you're kind of getting a similar answer, I would put that as, same bucket. It's more about themes and overall direction than exact things, right? But some of the things obviously you're trying to get to is the problem I'm solving what we call a hair on fire problem, meaning important enough for the customer to want to make a change in behavior for it? So that's one of the key things, right, to figure out. And then what they may be doing today or not, or is this even the right customer? Sometimes what you're trying to also understand is how they go about making a decision on the purchase, right? So if you're evolving in a complex ecosystem, we'll talk more about ecosystem in another session, but a lot of time the interviews are helpful to even understand the ecosystem. Like, I don't even know, I'm working with hospitals and doctors and nurses and this and that, and I don't even, so the data helps you more on general themes and understanding. So that's why it doesn't have to be like rigorous in a scientific manner. But once you get to the next level, that's also why, if you go to a national or other level, again, the number makes it like, you will be asked to do a lot more interviews to have more of that significance in the data. But here we're just trying to identify general theme, validation or invalidation of what you're thinking, if that makes sense.
Yes, okay. I got themes and overall direction, and anything that's rising to the top is what we should look for. Okay, thank you.
Eric?
Yeah, I'd definitely say that a theme is important, and I don't want you to jump off, their first customer says, no, that's a stupid idea, then you immediately shift. Try and see if a couple of people say that before you think about shifting. But sometimes one interviewee will have some very insightful point that maybe because you're the way you were asking questions before, they suddenly say something, you say, oh my gosh, that's right. I never thought of using it that way. That's a totally different approach. So that's why listening to what they're saying rather than reading a script can be very useful, and being able to follow them along and say like, oh yeah, that I didn't consider that. I'd like to talk more about that. So have those questions ready, but be prepared to go off if something really impactful comes up in the discussion.
Thank you, Eric. Philip?
So one of the other things that on the data side, and everybody's these throwaway questions or try to figure out who they are, you do want to understand their job and put them into buckets so that you can understand when you start looking at it, you can start putting together fuzzy trends. Do they work in a big company? Do they work in a small company? What's these things? Or as Eric said, here's somebody that's completely niche market, right? So I don't know anybody like that. So there is the fuzzy human response to questions, but there's all the other demographics and their behaviors. For those of you doing customer facing things, you're looking at the psychographics as well to try to see if there's, just like marketers, like I don't buy advertising to for BMWs to people that can't afford a BMW, right? So there's some little bit of logic in there. So your ability to be a good data scientist and collect your notebooks, it will send you in good stead. The follow-on is what you learn when you first do interviews, and you look back at your notebook of interviews from 3 months later, you'll relearn new things because you personally have learned, and you'll see new insights because you've recorded your data, your analysis. So that would be two other things.
Thank you, Philip. Scott, and then me.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, this is just customer discovery. So this is kind of a first stage, and then you're gonna, after this class, want to move into product market fit understanding. And I know that's very different, and there's deep tech startups and entrepreneurs here, and then there's also consumer facing and B2B. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. So I can't give a pat answer. I could talk to you all individually about how to get to product market fit after this class. But just keep in mind that, yeah, like everyone said before, like if this is directional, it's not meant to have you decide whether or not you're moving towards a certain customer segment or in a certain pivot or whatever. I mean, I would need a lot more evidence in a few, 20 or 30 or 100 customer interviews before I would like pivot my entire company, just as an aside.
Good point, Scott. Yeah, and so my question, it could be a simple no to you, Isabelle, but was there anything at the national I-Corps program that you're taking now that helps these teams in terms of securing initial interviews, or do they just expect that since everyone's already gone through a program that they know how to do it and you're on your own?
No, and actually some of them, they are different stage. Some of them were still not defining customer segments as people, which was driving me a little crazy. But I mean, in terms of finding people, I should have talked a little more about that. So LinkedIn, I think, they can put in the budget probably here, Sales Navigator, LinkedIn group. So if you're targeting specific jobs, think of, professional groups on LinkedIn, but of course, professional associations. The best thing is if there is a conference or in-person, meetup, any kind of gathering of the kind of people you wanted to talk to. If you're in the business to consumer space, Facebook groups are amazing. You can find a lot of people on Facebook groups to, maybe connect with. Just be creative, thinking outside the box. Again, the mentor can help you brainstorm if your struggle is to find people. But even very specialized customers, usually we have a lot of different ideas on how you can reach them. Am I answering your question, Jay?
Yes, you answered my question, and I think people were scurrying down to write down those notes so that they can utilize some of those things. So thank you very much, Isabelle, for the presentation. It's just what we needed and more. So thank you once again.